It is my utmost pleasure now to welcome Melanie Windsor, Executive Director, Programs and Integrated Planning at the Canadian Space Agency, and Dr. Christyl Johnson, Deputy Director for Technology and Research Investments at the NASA Goddard Space Flight Center, for a candid discussion about the role of women in space exploration. Welcome, ladies.
Hi, Caroline. It's wonderful to be here with you.
Thank you. Let me begin with Melanie. Although you had a working mother, you grew up being told that women should hold certain roles, that science was too hard and that you should focus on something else. You were always fascinated by space, yet you were guided into commerce. You still persevered and built your career, hoping you could join the Canadian Space Agency one day. So tell us what got you where you are now.
Oh, there's so many things that got me to where I am right now. To start with, one of my very first memories that I remember is watching the Challenger explosion and seeing someone being launched into space who was just a regular woman was just something that was amazing. And then what happened was something awful to watch. But for me, what it did was it made me realize what I wanted to do, which was I wanted to change. I wanted to take advantage as much as I could as I moved along. And so I've been in the government of Canada for 22 years, and I focused on commerce because that was what I was kind of guided towards, because I knew I could make a career out of that. But early on, even with a working mom, it was interesting that science was kind of taken off the table, whether it was by teachers or by friends or family. And so I did it without conscious thought. But as I start to build my career, I started to watch people around me. I started to look at the leaders and how they interacted and the barriers that were there. And I wanted to overcome those. And I learned about the leader I wanted to be. And so I slowly moved up. I was a clerk as my first job in the government, and slowly moved up until finally I became an executive at a science-based organization. And at the time I was working with an astronaut who was the vice president, Bob Thirsk. And he was a phenomenal person to learn from. And it just made me realize how much I still had my heart set on space. And when he went and took another job at one of the universities in Canada, it really left a hole for me in the organization. And so, a few months later, the job came up at the Canadian Space Agency. And even in that moment, when I saw this posting, I self-stigmatized and said, oh, I don't have the experience. It's too big of a job and I have no knowledge or experience in space. There's no way they're going to let me take this job. And it was actually my boss at the time who said, Melanie, I have nothing left to offer you. I can't give you my job and there's nowhere else. So you need to apply for this. You need to apply for this job and give yourself the credit you deserve. And so I applied. I put everything on the table that I had to offer and I got the job. And so the job that I have at the Canadian Space Agency makes me responsible for reporting to Parliament. It makes me responsible for our Enterprise Project Management Office. And more importantly, it kind of brings me back to that original day when I watched the Challenger explode, because I am responsible for safety and mission assurance, which was a program that existed at the time, but really got its push after the Challenger exploded and became a critical part of both NASA and the Canadian Space Agency. And so I'm responsible now for ensuring to protect human life, our assets in space, and ensuring that we protect the environment. And so from start to finish, space has been a goal for me, and I finally achieved it thanks to the people in my life who let me know that I could do this even when I doubted myself.
And that's fantastic. I mean, coming out of your comfort zone, at the end of the day, you felt it might not be really the job for you. A lot of women do this, right? Self-stigmatize, and kudos for your boss, male boss, for pushing you to where you got today. Christyl, it's a huge pleasure to share the stage with you again. We were both on the jury for the global contest for women in tech. The last time we were in person, it was in Paris. Always a good idea to be in Paris. Yes. And then we spoke at Viva Tech together as well. You also graciously invited me to be NASA's keynote speaker for Women's Equality Day. And now here you are as our guest for this Global Parity Summit. So thank you for accepting our invitation. Christyl, can you tell us about your career path and what took you from the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy to NASA?
Yes. So my career actually started at NASA when I was really, really little, watching the television and saying, one day I want to be, an astronaut. But then I, decided I'd go to college and try to do something in computer science. And then I had the wonderful opportunity to do a summer internship at NASA. So any of you out there that have an opportunity or have kids or relatives that are looking for internships, it is so incredibly invaluable for them to get that hands-on experience. So I got a chance to go in. And when I first got there, I was thinking, okay, they assigned me to a physics lab. What in the world would I want to do in physics? So I was kind of upset at the time. But I always say in every single cloud, there's always a silver lining. You just have to look for it. And you have to have that positive mindset with everything. So I go in and I, see this danger laser sign on the door. And when he opens the door, he hands us these goggles and says, put these glasses on and don't lean down to the level of the table because there are stray laser beams flying around the room. And if it pops you in the eye, it can blind you. And so I was like, what in the world have I gotten myself into? Why am I doing this? And so I decided to go on in, and I get in and he's leaning over the laser table, the bench, and he's adjusting the mirrors of the laser. And all of a sudden I hear pop, pop, pop and smoke. Apparently he had gotten his sleeve in the beam and it put a hole in his sleeve and there was smoke coming up. So I was like, yes, this is the job for me. You get to shoot lasers around the room and you get to put holes and stuff. I thought that was the coolest thing, but that opened up my mind to a whole new way of living. And so I was designing and building laser systems there. And then I went to NASA headquarters. A wonderful opportunity arose that just happened to be a by chance situation. I go to NASA headquarters, and then we have the Columbia accident. And for the Columbia accident, they said we were doing a horrible job of overseeing the engineering for our agency. It was just a chief engineer with 5 staff members. And how could you possibly oversee the engineering at 10 NASA centers with those 5 employees? You're just doing a horrible job. So I was asked to come up to the office of the chief engineer and work with the chief engineer to stand up a new office of the chief engineer. So I did that, and I became the deputy chief engineer for our agency for program management and institutional activities within the agency. And then I got an opportunity to go up to be the assistant associate administrator of NASA when we got a new NASA administrator in place, Mike Griffin, who was a wonderful administrator. And so he established a chief operating officer kind of position as the associate administrator for NASA. So I was his deputy. And then we had the election that came up. And that was the election where President Obama became the president of the United States. So I went over to the White House just a couple of weeks before that election. And I did an interview because I said, I've never been close to a transition before. I would love to see what they look like. And so the deputy administrator called over to the White House and said, do you need any help? And they said, well, we don't have any positions right now, but just send her over and we'll interview her. And then right after I interviewed the person who was the executive director of the National Science and Technology Council in the White House, and that's the council that coordinates all science and technology policy across the entire federal enterprise, he announced that he was going back to his agency for a promotion. So they said, we just interviewed the perfect person for this role. Let's get her over here. So I started working at the White House one day before the election. And so I watched, what happened on election day. And then I was there for George Bush to close down that administration and then to welcome on the Obama administration. And the Obama administration asked me to stay for another year to help them transition that council and to give it more teeth in how they're governing. And so I went from there from the White House over to Goddard Space Flight Center. I was called by the center director at that time and said, we've got a deputy position opening. I know your detail could be coming to an end at some point. Would you please consider coming to Goddard? And I thought that was an amazing opportunity, because Goddard is one of the few places in the country that has complete end-to-end capability, all the way from coming up with an idea to building a prototype to building the flight versions and launching on our own facilities, and then taking the data once you're up there on those satellites, analyzing the data and transitioning it into something that can improve the quality of life for all. So it's been a wonderful track for me.
What an amazing journey. Was that your dream since childhood, or did everything just sort of fall into place?
So it has always been my dream since childhood. And I'll say when I was a child, I wanted to be an astronaut. But then I realized once I started working at NASA, you can't be claustrophobic and be an astronaut because you're in this tiny, tiny capsule. And in order to test you, they zip you in a little bag. You're balled up like this. They zip you in a little bag. You have to be able to stay in there for a long period of time. And that would not have worked for me. And so I was like, I think I'm better off just being an engineer that works on the instrumentation and the launch vehicles and everything else, and letting those people go up there, and I'll stay back down here on the Earth and make my difference here.
Well, wouldn't be for me either. I start stressing the minute the elevator slows down. So I can just imagine myself in one of those tests. I would not do well. Melanie, so now you've followed your dream. You work with astronauts. We've spoken, both you and Christyl have spoken about accidents that have happened. You've played a role relative to creating a safe space for missions. Can you tell us about that?
Absolutely. So I have based my career on being able to speak truth to power. And so, growing with that leadership has really made it so that I can develop the roles and responsibilities and policies I need to be able to continue to do that. And so whether it's safety mission assurance or the Enterprise Project Management Office, I have to be able to advise the president of the Canadian Space Agency on the actual status. And I have that really hard job of being the devil's advocate or saying, maybe we need to take another look at this. And so without a safe space for any of these roles, it's very, very difficult, especially when you then have to report what you've done with taxpayer money to Parliament in reports. And so in each of my roles, I had this responsibility that I take very, very seriously. And it's because of my background and the way that I basically grew up and built my career, that I felt that I could do this, because my goal as I was growing up was to conquer barriers that were placed in front of me. Anytime somebody said no, I kind of took a step back and went, is it really no, or is there another way to do this? And so that is exactly the approach I take in work. I look to collaborate. I look to bring people in and advise based on the information before us. And so that is how I take that role and how I make sure that we protect human life, the assets, and the environment. And it's created an environment within the space agency where people can actually voice their concerns and say when things aren't going the way they're supposed to. Because at the end of the day, failure is not necessarily a bad thing. Failure is a good thing because you can learn from it. You just don't want to lose human life. And so as long as you have that balance and as long as you work together and are open and honest and collaborate, you can get past that difficulty of not wanting to say what's really going on.
Such an important job. Christyl, NASA has machinery that allows to sense light years away, stars that are light years away. Now you're leading a very important, critical, I would say, and exciting project at the agency. You've developed with your team a breathalyzer that has COVID sensors. And you're currently running clinical trials, and I guess you should be ended, if I'm not mistaken, by the end of December, and then going to FDA approval a few months later, I guess. What does that mean for our new normal?
So we are still in the development stages of that. NASA develops our sensors for NASA's purposes, but when we had this horrible pandemic that has swept across the entire globe, our NASA administrator said, okay, let's look at all of the technologies and capabilities that we have within NASA and see if there are any of these that we can use to help bring solutions to the table to solve this challenge. And so a couple of our different centers work together to come up with this idea. We have a person at our Ames Research Center who had been working on an electronic nose, an e-nose is what we call it. And these sensors can actually sniff the COVID virus. And so what we've been doing is working jointly together to develop these sensors that you can actually just blow into, like an alcohol breathalyzer. And within seconds, you will know whether or not you've been infected. And because of the sensors that we were using with carbon nanotubes, the sensitivity and the specificity of this particular virus can be so unique and so very, very high that you reduce the amount of false negatives and you reduce the amounts of false positives so that you can actually imagine being able to open up the cruise industry again. You know, everybody does a blow test before you get on that boat and you know whether or not people are infected. We can open up stadiums again and let, people back in. We can, when you're working in the buildings that you're working in, everyone has to do the blow test before they come in. And then when you're inside, you don't have to worry about getting into a conference room with multiple people in there because you know that everybody that's in that building today is clean. And so, of course, they would have to retest every time, they come to the buildings. But it's just one more of the rapid tests that are out there and one that is hopefully more accurate than some of the other rapid tests that are out there. So we're really excited about it. We've been partnering with the Center for Disease Control. We've also been partnering with several of the clinics so that they can help us with the clinical trials, getting access to sick patients and to the breath that comes from sick patients. The biggest challenge for us in all of this is identifying what specific volatile organic compounds come from a person's breath that is unique to COVID-19, not one of the other COVID SARS, not the common flu, and not the common cold, but specifically COVID-19. And once we can work with the clinicians to identify exactly what that is, then we can tune our sensors to it, get our prototypes, developed on a mass market, and get them out there for everybody so that they can use them.
That's fascinating. Is it realistic? Do you actually think it's going to happen concretely and be available? Is it going to be distributed globally? How are we going to see it?
Yeah, it's going to happen. It's just a matter of when. I mean, because I'm an engineer and I'm an innovator. I do technology development for a living, and I'm responsible for shaping the crazy missions of the future in astrophysics, earth science, heliophysics, and planetary science. So I'm the wrong person to second guess or to think that we're not going to be able to do something, because I believe if you can conceive it in your mind, you can figure out what needs to be done to make it happen. It's just a matter of what you're willing to do to make it so. Because we have so many organizations within the United States that are willing to step up to the plate, provide the resources, provide the people, provide the expertise to make this happen, I have absolutely no doubt that we will develop this breathalyzer. And they've been working on these breathalyzers in other parts of the world as well, not just the United States. But as we all come together and work on these technologies together, we will bring them to market. And I'm already working with companies that are ready to bring this kind of thing to market once we get the FDA approvals. And so I'm excited about being able to use them at NASA because we've got these launch dates, launch windows. And if you miss a launch window, you have to keep things, keep your marching army going at an exorbitant fee, a cost, to keep all of those people on board until you meet the next window to be able to launch. So we've got to keep people working. We've got to keep them safe. We've got to provide all the PPE. And if we can do this rapid testing, it will make it so much easier for our employees to come in and get the work done that needs to be done.
Well, the world needs dreamers and the world needs doers, but what the world needs the most are dreamers that do. And you're one of these people, Christyl.
I love it.
Melanie, just like Christyl, you're a model for the next generation. You teach girls and young women to take credit and take their space. How important is mentorship in your life and in the lives of these ambitious girls and young women?
I think mentorship is key. For me, and I think for anybody out there, mentorship allows you, similar to space exploration, it allows you to push at the limits of what's possible. It gives you the advice that you need and the space you need to grow and to try and find a new approach. So for me, my mentors taught me not only what I was and my gaps of where I was, but also they taught me to not make myself small, to take my place at the table, to own what I could do, because as women, we sometimes don't take the full space of what we can, thinking that maybe our opinion isn't as important to the conversation. It is absolutely critical that we get away from that. And so my mentors, and this includes men and women, help me to see that, help me to take my space at the table, help me to stop self-stigmatizing. There's often this term for women where we hear about, that we make ourselves small, or that we have imposter syndrome. And that is not the case. If we actually step up and listen to people around us, watch the people around us, everyone has an opportunity of mentoring us. Some of the people that I've come across in my career do not realize how they shaped and guided and made the leader that I am today. And so for me, looking at the next generation, I want to remove the barriers I encountered, open up the doors, and make girls feel and women feel that they can take their place at the table, that those barriers no longer exist, and that together we can take the limits of what was placed at a prior generation and push them into the future and explore in a way that we never have before.
So important. I mean, nothing magical is ever going to happen to you if you stay within your comfort zone. There's work to be done. There are fears to be overcome, and likely easier to do when you have someone more experienced, more mature, that you can run ideas off of. So, and I'm sure from all that you've learned from your boss who pushed you to accept the job that you're currently holding, that probably also shaped the mentor that you've become. Christyl, Jim Bridenstine, the NASA administrator, named the agency's headquarters building in Washington, D.C. after Hidden Figure Mary Jackson, recognizing her contribution as the first African-American female engineer at NASA, successfully overcoming the barriers of segregation and gender bias to become a professional aerospace engineer and leader in ensuring equal opportunities for future generations. So how was that welcomed by NASA employees and the greater public in general?
It was actually welcomed without any problem whatsoever. NASA has been pretty much at the forefront for quite some time in trying to doing innovation. And in order for you to innovate, you really have to have diversity in thinking. And so that diversity in thinking only comes when you have diverse people coming to the table with their different ideas. So we had no problem. There's been no pushback. And we've been very fortunate that NASA is one of the only institutions within the United States that is apolitical, which means it's not Republican, it's not Democratic, and it has not been politically, it hasn't been a political focus in the history of NASA. This year has been, or this administration has been the first time that there's been a real, I guess there's been a real push for making sure that we're even standing up the Space Force. It's been a real focus on space, and it's been very positive for all of us.
Well, I actually wasn't really expecting any pushback. I would have been shocked if there was pushback. But did that instill a sense of pride from not only the Black women in the organization, but everyone in general? Because it's kind of a sense of equity and fairness that comes with this baptizing of the NASA headquarters.
Yes, it was such a warm feeling because it was unexpected. We employees did not know that it was going to happen before it did. And when we heard about it, we were just like, oh my goodness, this is really amazing. And it's a difference when someone says, certain things, but when you're actually walking the talk and your actions are speaking for you, that's when you know that the person is really serious. So our administrator, Jim Bridenstine, we took our hats off to him, because for him to actually make that move was amazing. And as a Black woman, and watching Hidden Figures, I know what it is to kind of feel that. And Melanie, the point that you made about, the imposter syndrome and all of that I hope everybody hears very clearly what you were saying. I definitely experienced it, Caroline, definitely experienced it. And when I didn't even realize just how important that is for you to have your own self-worth within you. No one can make you feel inferior unless you give them permission to. And that is something that I did not realize until I came into a meeting one time, and I was so happy to be at NASA. Everything was just like, oh, I'm so happy to be here. This is in the very beginning. I didn't know the acronyms. I didn't know what they were talking about. I was like, I don't understand you, but I'm so happy to be here. Just kind of, happy to be in the room. And I'd walk into a meeting and I'd sit along the wall because I'm like, I don't know as much as these men. Have no idea, and they don't necessarily want to hear what I have to say, especially as a young Black female. I had 3 strikes against me. And so I behaved that way because I devalued myself. I did not understand that until my technician, a white male, came into the office one day and he was like, man, I just had to pull, I'll just call her Ann off the ceiling today. She was very upset. And I said, why? And he said, she was very upset that you got the management position for the electro-optics and controls branch. I was the assistant head. He said she's upset that you got that only because you're Black.
Oh.
And so I was like, really? And normally I just kind of let things go. I let, like water off a duck's back. But this time, for some reason, I was a little troubled by it. And I was thinking to myself, why would she assume that just because I'm Black is the only reason I get this position? I said, it's not because I established the first chromium laser laser to ever achieve 33 millijoules in the world. It's not because I established the first piezoelectric coefficient laboratory and people are coming from around the world to measure their crystals in my laboratory. It's not because, and I kept going on and on. I was like, wait a minute, I deserve to be here. I deserve to have a seat at the table just like these other men do. Never again will I let someone else's opinion of me shape what I think of myself. And so from that moment on, I said, never again will I walk into a room and sit along the wall. I will take my proper seat at the table, just like the rest of those men do. And because I knew who I was, and I knew the beauty and the value that diversity brings to the table, that totally changed my outlook. And so all those things that were happening before weren't happening to me. That was their issue. I could totally let that go because I knew who I was and I knew what I could bring to the table and I owned it. And that's how I've gotten to where I am today.
Wow. Wow. Brilliant. And if they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair.
There you go.
And it's funny, I'm listening to all that you say, especially in terms of people judging you. Did you get the job because you're a Black woman? Or often just because you're a woman? Because I hear that a lot. And I hear women who say, I don't want to be named on that board because I'm a woman. And I say, but where does that even come from? And I do a lot, it's not the topic of this panel, so I'm not going to get too much into this, but I do a lot of lobbying with government for quotas, for regulation, to have more women on boards, which has been very successfully implemented in Europe, and namely in France, that has twice the number of women on boards that we have in Canada. And I often have this as an obstacle coming from both men and women who say, oh, well, if there's a legislation, then people are going to think that I'm here because I am a woman. And I say, nobody is going to name you there without you having the appropriate experience, the degrees. And believe me, because a lot of people come to us to say, we are looking for women for our board, and they know we've got a governance training program, we've got mentoring program, and they often will actually ask way more of these women than they will ask of men. So when a woman does make it to this board, she's actually got twice the level of experience as any man who is on there. And I'll just close on that particular topic by quoting this famous French philosopher. Her name is Françoise Giroud, and she used to say that the day that we will reach equality is the day when an incompetent woman is nominated to an important job.
Love it.
So continuing on to our original topic, Melanie, the Canadian Space Agency has recently named its first female president in history. What was the impact on morale, on employee engagement? How did women react? How did men react at the Canadian Space Agency?
I think in this one, we have the first woman president of the Canadian Space Agency, and she's phenomenal to work with, and she's so open, and she's definitely cares about the people at the agency. And so we had a president, though, that sought parity, though, for people at the management table. And so I know my first day walking into the Canadian Space Agency, and I sat down at our executive committee, and I looked around the table, and I realized we had the same number of women as we had men. And so having Lisa come in, having had that at the table, it was just a happiness that we would continue to push that forward. And again, it wasn't because she was a woman, it's because she was the right person for the job. And she has the experience we need to guide this agency into the future. And so for the agency, it's been tremendous. We've transitioned from one president to the other it was seamless, even during a pandemic. We have open conversations. We are continuing to achieve the results. We're continuing to push forward. And so the agency at its heart is still the same agency. It's still the same family. It has the same environment, except we're a little bit remote right now and virtual. But we continue to support each other. We continue to care about each other and focus on our wellness together while we achieve everything we need to achieve. So Lisa has enabled us to stay not only stable, but push for the stars like we always have. And so she's been a fantastic addition. And we look forward every day to being able to achieve results with her at its head.
That's great. And you had mentioned to me that the Canadian Space Agency was doing very well in terms of gender equality, including at the executive level. So we're super excited about that, and also hoping that both the Canadian Space Agency and NASA will consider enrolling in Women in Governance's Parity certification. We've had these conversations before, and we'll have them after, I'm sure. And that's the best way to ensure that there is constant support and something sustainable that is put in place for women to continue to progress within the organization, and for it to be natural and normal to have women at every level, in every job, in every industry, and that's what we're aiming for. So Melanie Windsor, Executive Director, Programs and Integrated Planning at the Canadian Space Agency, and Dr. Christyl Johnson, Deputy Director for Technology and Research Investments at the NASA Goddard Space Flight Center. Thank you so much to both of you. It was a huge pleasure for me to have you both here, and I'm sure we'll do more events together in the future. It was lovely to have you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
It has.